We spoke with another Republican presidential candidate, former Governor Jeb Bush, earlier, and asked him how his strategy to defeat ISIS would be any faster or more effective than the current one.
I'd say a no-fly zone, creating safe zones in Syria, directly arming the Kurds in Iraq, re-engaging both politically and militarily with the Sunnis, the Sunni tribal leaders that were effective partners in the creation of the surge, have our troops be embedded with the Iraqi military. But basically, all of this needs to be a strategy, not just one-off kind of incremental decisions being made by this president who wants to run out the clock. The strategy ought to be, how do we destroy ISIS and how do we create political stability in the aftermath? And right now we have neither.
You've talked about saying you would listen to the generals in terms of their advice about ground troops to fight ISIS in Syria or in Iraq. One of the things the president has said is that his military advisors have told him that without a force on the ground to help U.S. troops, that basically if you were going to put U.S. troops in, they'd have to stay as an occupational force. Is that wrong in your view?
I think it is wrong. I think that had we kept a small force in Iraq, we wouldn't have the mess that we have right now. Look, the president and Hillary Clinton both said that al-Qaeda in Iraq was decimated, was gone. And when we pulled back diplomatically, politically, remember Hillary Clinton only traveled to Iraq one time during her 4 years. That lack of commitment created the instability that now has created a caliphate. So, of course, we need to have engagement. And without American leadership, this isn't going to happen. And it's going to require troops on the ground, mostly special operators, that are helping build this force. But we need to lead in this regard to garner the support of the Persian Gulf countries, other Arab nations, and Europe.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what the number is here between you want troops to go in, but then everybody seems to agree there need to be some kind of stability afterwards. You've mentioned the surge from George W. Bush's presidency. That surge was successful because hundreds of thousands of troops were in there. So how does it work in this case without that many troops?
Well, first of all, had we kept 10,000 troops as the military leaders had recommended, we wouldn't have ISIS. My point is, in the post-ISIS world, there needs to be stability. You can't just allow the void to be filled. I think we need to do this not unilaterally. We need to do this in concert with Syrian Sunni-led forces, well-trained, backed up by air superiority, and we need to garner the support of the Arab world, not to in a unified fashion, to create a fighting force that will both take out ISIS as well as bring about change in the Assad regime.
But if 10,000 was a good sustaining force in Iraq after all of the activity that had been there, this is a totally new adventure. So it would seem that upwards of 10,000 troops would be necessary for the kind of engagement you're talking about.
If I'm commander-in-chief, my first order is give me options. And if the military says that we need a fighting force of X thousand, and this is the best way to destroy ISIS, then I would take that under advisement for sure. I believe most people that I've talked to, military leaders, think that we can't do this alone, but it's going to require more effort than we have right now.
In terms of building a coalition, you've said that you would, Russia could be an ally in this fight, but only if they abandon their alliance with Assad in Syria. How do you get them to do that?
I don't think we will. I have grave doubts whether Russia would make that big kind of sea change. But we always should be in dialogue with Russia. My problem is talking to Russia from a position of weakness only enables their objectives. It has nothing to do with ours. If we were stronger, we would be in a better position to deal with them.
One of your security advisors, John Noonan, referred to Donald Trump and his plan for registering Muslims. He called him a fascist. Do you agree with that?
Look, I just think he's uninformed. He knows what he's saying. He's smart. He's playing you guys like a fiddle, the press, by saying outrageous things and garnering attention. That's his strategy, is to dominate the news. The simple fact is that he's been wrong on Syria and on the refugees pretty consistently, and no one's holding him to account. He first said we had no interest in being involved in Syria. Then he said, let the Russians take out ISIS. Then he said, let ISIS take out Assad. Back and forth it goes, and the net effect of this is, in these really serious times, he's not a serious leader.
So why, if he became the nominee, would you still support him as you've pledged to?
Look, I've said, because anybody is better than Hillary Clinton, let me just be clear about that, but I have grave doubts about Donald Trump's ability to be commander-in-chief. I really do. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt to see how the campaign unfolded, but if you listen to him talk, it's kind of scary, to be honest with you, because he's not a serious candidate. He doesn't talk about about the issues at hand that are of national security importance for our country. To keep us safe is the first priority of the president. And he's all over the map, misinformed at best, and preying on people's fear at worst.
How would any of that specifically be better than Hillary Clinton?
Well, I'll let the voters decide about Donald Trump. I'm pretty confident that the more they hear of him, the less likely it is he's going to get the Republican nomination.
Let me ask you about your position on refugees. You mentioned that perhaps an approach might be to allow Christian Syrian refugees in. How would having a kind of a religious test like that, wouldn't that play into the narrative ISIS wants, which is this is a battle between the Christians and Islam?
Look, it is already in the law that there is a requirement to screen for religion. This is the practice of our country. There was a bipartisan bill that, of course, didn't pass in Congress this year to provide preference for Christians who are being slaughtered in the Middle East, persecuted based on their faith. Religious minorities, I think, should have some preference. I think we ought to do what we can to provide support for the refugees. The best means to do it are safe havens inside of Syria. That's ultimately what we need to do, and this president hasn't led in that regard.
All right, Governor Jeb Bush, thanks so much for being with us.
You bet.